So there's a bit of a background to this podcast. 2 days ago I went down to the dentist for the extraction of 3 roots. I had 3 teeth that were capped. 2 of the caps had come loose, and on the other tooth there was what I thought was a small infection beneath the root. Turned out it wasn't a small infection. So I lay there for about an hour thinking it was going to be a stroll in the park, and it wasn't. Out came the pliers, the hammer, the chisel, the screwdrivers, and my mouth was sort of pounded about for about an hour. And so I'm now on a fairly heavy dose of antibiotics and painkillers and all that kind of stuff, and was feeling very, very sorry for myself. And then I remembered something that I read in Spinoza, and in fact it's something I've understood for a long time, but of course when events overtake a person you tend to forget all the good stuff that you've learnt. So you can see the slide there, and there are 3 quotes which I'll get to shortly. But first I want to talk about this idea of the pleasurable study of pain. Sounds like some kind of oxymoron, but actually, in my opinion, the pleasurable study of pain is one of the highest things a man can do in this life, because it offers some level of, meaning to things that might otherwise appear to be meaningless and just simply painful. And Spinoza said a great deal about this, hence the quotes. And I think a good place to start is to describe exactly what pain is. Pain is always when your existence is threatened in some way, either a small way or a large way. So the pain in my body is telling me that there's something a bit wrong and you're not as super fit and agile as you normally are. I'm joking there, I'm not super fit and agile, but anyway, you're not in the state you normally are in. And then pleasure. It's when we have an enhanced sense of existence. You win $1 million, you get some gorgeous new mate, you get a massive promotion at work, anything that makes your existence feel more enhanced, makes you feel more solid in life, is going to bring you pleasure. That's the way it works. It's all fairly basic stuff. It's all driven by the survival instinct, or what Spinoza calls the drive to persist in our existence, or the will to life, as Schopenhauer calls it. Various people call it various things, but at the end of the day, it's just this drive to exist, to continue in our existence. And that drives pretty much all the pleasure and pain. There are other kinds of pleasure, but I'm not particularly going to get into those. So, just a warning here. You cannot study pain if you are depressed or angry. All you're going to do is, in some kind of way, try and justify your depression or anger. If you are a very angry or depressed person, or very unhappy in some way, then you need help. This is not about that. This is about something completely different. So we're not here talking about some way to justify feeling angry or depressed. If you're like that, then you need help. Go and seek it. So, the first quote. And this is one of the strangest quotes in the whole of Spinoza's works, in my opinion. You have to remember that God for Spinoza is not an old man in the sky with a beard. God is pretty much synonymous with nature, or the cosmos, or existence, whatever word you want to use. So he says, therefore, insofar as we understand God to be the cause of pain, we to that extent feel pleasure. What a strange thing to say, and I know I've commented on this quote in other podcasts, but it's a central thing. It's a central piece of information that helps a person understand pretty much the whole of what Spinoza is talking about. Because what Spinoza is trying to do for people who go to the trouble of studying him and practicing what he preaches He's trying to help them live a pleasurable life. And you may think that's not possible, but actually it is possible. And he's saying that part of that pleasure can be derived by studying pain. Well, what most people do in life is they sort of go into denial about pain. So we get all the positive thinking types, and all they're thinking about is success and health and vitality and whatever else. And then when things don't go the way they expect, then they experience a lot of pain because all their expectations are not met. And so the contrast between what they expected and what's happened is bigger than if they just not bothered with all that stuff. So half your existence or half your experience will be pleasurable and half will be painful. Life is like that. It's a zero-sum game. Half of it will be great and half of it will be dreadful, in terms of pleasure and pain anyway. And so once we understand that pleasure and pain are just integral parts of life, then it makes sense, doesn't it, to find a way to deal with pain that also generates pleasure, insofar as it is possible for us to do that. And it's not always possible, but it is in many situations. So Spinoza says that understanding how the universe or nature inflicts pain can bring us pleasure. And this is the way he approaches the whole thing around the emotions. So you can see some more quotes. I shall consider human actions and desires in exactly the same manner as though I were concerned with lines, planes and solids. Well, there you go. This is this purely intellectual, detached study of the way the universe generates pain. So here's one way the universe generates pain. And if you're looking for some kind of uplifting podcast, then switch this off now. It's not that. Go and listen to Tony Robbins or something. So here's one way the universe generates pain. When you are born, you are sentenced to death immediately. So your life will be a process of reaching some kind of rightness, probably around about the age of 20, 25 or thereabouts. And thereafter there's a slow degeneration which then happens rather more rapidly as you get older, to my kind of age. And then happens very quickly when you get into your 70s or 80s. And along the way you will have emotional problems, through relationships maybe. You will have physical problems that cause you pain, and maybe financial problems that threaten your security and all those kind of things. And this is the half of life that we would rather not contemplate, but actually by understanding how we are operating in those situations can actually be a source of pleasure. So let me give you an example. So say someone has say they lose their job, and their immediate emotional reaction will be something like, oh my God, how am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to pay for the kids to go to school? Healthcare, whatever. And those things will start to happen. And if a person at that point can remember that what they are experiencing is a diminishing in their sense of existence. This is how the whole game is set up. They're not going to stop feeling worried and all these kind of things, but all of a sudden there's another dimension in there, an understanding of what is actually going on from an objective point of view, instead of all the subjective angst that would normally consume a person. So that person is thinking, yeah, my power has been diminished. I am going to feel crap. This is the way it works. There's no point pretending that I'm not going to feel crap. Feeling crap is just a natural follow-on from feeling some kind of pain. Just the way it happens. But that understanding that this is how the universe and your life works, that your survival instinct is driving everything, And when your survival is threatened in some way, you are going to feel pain. And that creates just a little bit of space within you to look at the whole thing objectively. And if you do that on a fairly frequent basis, it offers a kind of escape route out of being totally consumed by the pain that you're in. You can study it and look at it in a more objective kind of way. I mean, I have to emphasize, this is an intellectual study. And as far as Spinoza is concerned, the emotions are essentially our fallen state. We are creatures of reason, or potentially creatures of reason, as far as he's concerned. And all the indulgence in the emotions is just a fallen state that takes us away from operating in a manner that is based on reason. And you might then think, well, what is this reason he's talking about? Well, the reason he's talking about is fairly simple to understand. Reason, as far as Spinoza is concerned, is a motivation behind actions that are most beneficial for you. That is it. He's not talking about logic, he's not talking about mathematics, he's not talking about physics or science. He's talking about how you can consider your situation at any particular moment in time and do the thing that is best for you. And then you start to say, well, what about everybody else? Well, it's included in the whole notion of reason, but I'm not going to go down that thing, maybe another podcast. But let me read the last of these quotes. He says, thus the passions of hatred, anger, envy, and so on, considered in themselves, follow from the same necessity and efficacy of nature. For Spinoza, hatred, envy, anger, and any number of what we would call negative emotions, jealousy, derision, are just effects of nature. When we are, so let's say we've just lost our job, and the guy across the road has just got a massive promotion, and he's got himself a huge, great new automobile. Are you going to feel envious? Well, yeah, possibly, particularly if you don't like him. And that is, for Spinoza, just a natural law playing out. There's nothing wrong with that feeling of envy. But envy is a pain. It's derived from hatred. And so it's useful to, again, understand, well, that guy's survival has been enhanced, my survival has been diminished, and I'm now feeling this envy. I wished he hadn't got that car. I wished he'd been made jobless. This is just a natural reaction to that situation. And if you can understand it without trying to modify it, then again you create a little bit of space that's an escape route to effectively just get away from being consumed by that emotion totally. The emotion is going to stay, but you don't have to be consumed by it completely. So I'll read that again. Thus the passions of hatred, anger, envy, and so on, considered in themselves, follow from the same necessity and efficacy of nature. They answer to certain definite causes through which they are understood, important word, and possess certain properties of worthy as being known as the properties of anything else, whereof the contemplation in itself affords us delight. Can contemplation of pain and suffering afford us delight? Yes, it can. I know that from my own experience. That doesn't mean that you're some kind of masochist or sadomasochist. It means that you can separate out your intellectual appreciation of these things from the emotional response. So if you switch on the TV and you see something awful happening in Syria, it doesn't mean that you don't have any empathy. All it means is that you have, as well as the immediate empathic response, you also have an intellectual understanding. Well, these poor people, their lives are being diminished to the point where they're just so miserable and unhappy. And you understand it from that point of view, just like you might understand it with respect to yourself. So those quotes, the first one for people who read Spinoza, they're all from the Ethics. The first one in yellow is from Proposition 18 in Part 5. And the other two are from the preface in Part 3 of his Ethics. In fact, that preface is worth reading over and over and over again, because at the times that I've studied this with other people, there's always been someone who objects to that preface. They believe that what we call the negative emotions are essentially invalid and should not exist. And that's the way we tend to think about it. But Spinoza says, no, no, no. All these emotions are going to happen in just the same way that you might study geometry and find out that all the angles in a triangle are two right angles or something. It sounds like it's sort of a little bit the behavior of a psychopath, but it isn't. All we're doing is we're freeing ourselves up to some extent from the chains that bind us. And the central chain that binds us is the desire to persist in our existence, because when that goes well, we're happy, and when it doesn't go well, we're unhappy. And we are just totally at the mercy of fortune. But if we can acquire some kind of skill and practice along these lines, of always looking at something from the point of view of, is this enhancing or diminishing my or somebody else's existence, then you get an intellectual understanding that has a certain degree of freedom associated with it. It's one of the most important things to come out of Spinoza's work. Anyway, I hope that's useful and that I've conveyed the essence of that well enough.